Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, COCOMI and Mr. Chair, for this very important opportunity. I think let's begin with the idea that this very gathering is important because we are celebrating the culture of dialogue, because we can talk about our differences with dignity. But at the same time, the concern is that when there's a warlike situation, the first casualty is truth. In some sense, I think this gathering is important because we are trying to look out for that truth, the significant aspects of understanding the Manipur question, which has become very intriguing in many sense. In Delhi, in Imphal, in many places, people have started talking about Manipur, but the struggle is still on what actually has happened in the state of Manipur. With this objective in my mind, I would like to appreciate the views as expressed by Justice Siddharth Middle, because he has been speaking on the issue of Manipur for quite some time, particularly since his retirement. I think his views are important because his views reflect the non-partisan aspect of doing a democratic dialogue. And these probably will also help in resolving the problems that we have. Just to cut short, he actually was raising significant points on the need for disarming youths in the state of Manipur. He was also very much concerned with the violence that has been meted out against women and children. He was also worried about the state failure situation in the state of Manipur. And he also drew his attention to the historical significance in the context of Manipur violence. He also did talk about the significant presence of Manipur in the global level in terms of the culture, sports, and natural beauty. His take on Manipur question basically reflects his melancholic perception about the ongoing violence in the state of Manipur. And his views also, again, I say, that reflects a democratic desire to bring or reinstate reinstating of rule of law in the state of Manipur. He, being from a legal background, seems to be concerned more with ensuring the read of the state, in his words, acting boots on the ground. His ideas also can be used as a very important reference point for understanding what are the invisible hands that have actually worked in fueling Manipur violence. Though he did not define what he meant by invisible hands, but at the same time he did not fail to say that these invisible hands are not so invisible in real sense. I think he has a very good sense of what has actually happened and what are the invisible hands that has actually caused and fueled the violence in the state of Manipur. I think he is talking about the drug lords. I'm sure he is talking about the militants who are actually going far beyond the established norms of conducting any situation of conflict or any situation of movement. He is also hinting to the question of what has to be done. And he says that there is a basic problem in the approach of the mainland Indians because they have completely failed to understand and comprehend the problems in Manipur. He uses this word, comprehending. I think he is trying to say that there is a lot of misperception about the region and there is an apathy towards the region and the politics. And I think this is true to a very, very great extent because we have always lived in a situation of exception. If we talk about the kind of laws that has been implemented in the state of Manipur particularly, and the kind of division of people on ethnic lines, and the kind of ethnic laws that you have had in the state of Manipur for the last so many years, something about 70 years, I think this is completely exceptional and it has not happened in any other state of the country. Therefore, I think his idea and call for the mainland Indians to understand and comprehend the questions of Manipur is very, very important. On the other side, he also talks about, identifying the root cause of the problem. He pays significant attention to the economic factors. By economic factors, he hints to the question of demand for ST. He sees that there are significant size of population in the valley who wishes to become ST. He also talks about land imbalance between the hill and the valley. I'm sure he has a very good legal background and he understands the legal nuances of the problem, particularly when it comes to the question of ST or even land asymmetry. I call it land asymmetry. There are many political scientists belonging to a certain community talking about asymmetric federalism, land asymmetry as a very important marker of distribution of power. I think in this very idea of asymmetry, I think there is an unfair proposition of asymmetric arrangement of land and institutions in the state of Manipur. And he rightly talked about these points by saying that there is an unfair distribution of land between the so-called hill and the valley. Because he also mentioned that there is 10% of the valley in which there are a lot of people, which is about 60% of the population being hosted here. And people, particularly from the valley, do not have the right to possess and own land in the hill areas of the state. I think he emphasizes on this point, and that is a very, very important point to start with, how to understand the problems in the state of Manipur in terms of identity and ethnicity. One more important thing that he talks about, and we must appreciate, is about his idea of inequity. I think when he talks about inequity, he talks beyond the lenses of ethnicity and identity. He talks in terms of a general concern for empowering and development of the state of Manipur beyond your ethnic predilections. And I think he's very right to say that there are questions of development, may it be in the valley or in the hills. In his word, I think he talks about the sinking land question in the valley, and this land crisis he thinks is a very, very important aspect of understanding the economic front of the ongoing problem in the state of Manipur. I leave the other explanations to him because I'm only referring to the terms and the idiom that he has used in his speech. When talking about the way forward, he talked about seizing of illegal arms. He talks about boots on the ground being active. He also talks about bringing in a lot of important stakeholders who can actually resolve the problem and lead to a fruitful dialogue. His main concern is also about how employment in the state of Manipur is completely reliant on public sector. And he being posted in Manipur for some time, I guess it was for about 11 months, he knew it very clearly that there was a severe economic problem in terms of employment because everybody in the state of Manipur, particularly youths, are looking for government jobs only because they don't have any other avenues of employment. And he reflected very well on this, and when he speaks these issues in Delhi, it has more resonance and significance because we have completely been converted into a sick state, Anavalepa, because we are dependent on the center, and this grand innate economic model is completely harming our dignity and identity because it has completely made us reliant on New Delhi's mercy and the budget. He was completely right and aligned with our own concerns that our economy has been completely, failed because of the institutional models that has been implemented in the state and the region. Particularly, we have always been seen as a borderland state, and these borderlands are never to be reliant, and it was very well reflected in the letters which were written in the 1940s and the 50s when the Congress was ruling the country. And I think Miraz had actually mentioned a lot of good important things about how the idea of Manipur was always multicultural. This multicultural identity of the state of Manipur is being questioned today by denying the historical facticity of the state, and there is a design of discourse to actually malign this very historicity of the state of Manipur. The whole idea of talking about the idea of Manipur is to reclaim the democratic culture that we have had, and now all of a sudden we are we're actually forced to kind of defend ourselves, forced to tell ourselves that we were once multicultural. All of a sudden, there's a conflict between communities, and there's an increasing misunderstanding between communities. And I think there is these situations because the designs of the institutions, because that divided people on ethnic lines. And it looks like the ongoing movements of the ethnic communities are actually increasingly harping on further division of the state of Manipur on these ethnic equations, which is completely against the historicity of our multicultural existence. Now, I leave his presentation here, and now I want to go to the second aspect of my presentation, which I think this is a very important opportunity for us and for me to speak on certain things about identity politics and ethnicity. I want to begin by claiming a couple of statements and propositions which I openly leave it to the audience and people who are hearing to me to challenge me in my perception and proposition if there is a need for that. But in the recent times, we have seen in the newspapers being written by certain community scholars. And I don't want to be identified as a community scholar because we have lived more as a collective identity, not as a community ethnocentric scholar. Coming to this point, what is the problem with ethnicity? That's very important for the Delhi people to understand. What's the problem with ethnicity? If you look at the speeches of Prashant Bhushan, he is completely, given the legal background he has, I think he has completely failed to understand the whole idea of state making. Manipur had a very advanced state-making process, and there was an increasing amalgamation of the hill and the valley through this process of state-making, and we are completely qualified to be called as a modern state because we have a long history of that kind of thing. When he was, I'm not encroaching upon the other scholars' presentation, but I think it is very important for me to dissect what Prashant Bhushan was trying to do on that day. He was simply trying to kind of give more further to the ethnocentric politics by saying that, of course, we need to redraw the boundaries of state on ethnic lines. That's really unbecoming on his part. He has completely failed to understand that there are overlapping spaces, and these overlapping spaces are important for democratic political culture. And he is giving further to these ethnocentric communal forces who are trying to, snatch away these overlapping spaces and resurrect new ethnic states. This is completely not acceptable to the very idea of democratic culture that we have lived through. Coming back to the other point, one basic problem that I see with the community scholars is that they are completely designing a discourse of generic identity. Generic identity is a new problem I think we're encountering with in the region and particularly in Manipur. I don't want to name these generic identities, but I would like to say that these generic identity, like achoba kaunupki rajniti haibatare, these generic identities are actually creating havoc on our multicultural spaces because they are trying to, resurrect new discourses by ending these overlapping spaces. And therefore, if you talk about the peace processes and its scope in the state of Manipur, you can see these ethnic communities, ethnic politicians actually not really interested in engaging with differences and the ideas or through democratic processes, because that will ultimately end up this very idea of generic identity politics. And the generic identity politics has a very typical problem because they repress the diversities within this generic identity. And we see it very clearly. A lot of smaller communities were having 700 people population, 1,000 people population. These communities are increasingly having, a sense of threat because of the politics of generic identity, their dress, their culture, their food habit, their folktales, all being, moderated to fit into the politics of generic identity. Therefore, I think we must keep on harping on this point that this very concept of ethnic minority is a very problematic concept, because in the very identity of the minority politics, there is also a sense of majoritarianism, because they also keep on repressing micro tribes within these acclaimed identity of generic kind. Coming back to the other point, I want to also argue that ethnicity has made people very one-dimensional. There's a political scientist called Herbert Marcuse. He has argued that Capitalism is making people one-sided, one-dimensional, because we only buy things which is promoted by capitalist logic. Similarly, ethnicity is making people one-dimensional because they only talk the language of ethnicity and nothing else. This is a very dangerous trend, and we must actually intervene, and we must stand against this making of people one-dimensional. You are a Naga, you are a Meitei, you are a Kuki, you are a Pangal. This is a very, very dangerous discourse. And I'm reminded of the words and the thesis as proposed by Herbert Marcuse, that capitalism makes you one-dimensional, so as ethnicity for me. To the other aspect of the problem, this absoluteness of binaries has been projected by the ethnocentric political thinkers. We have seen them in abundance these days. And I think the mainland people have completely taken a colonial perception, colonial perspective. They've resided in the colonial perspective to understand the people in the region, whereby they're forgetting that these people are very multicultural in many sense, and they have a rich history and culture. And this respect for each other is beginning to be diminishing because of the increasing deep state role, where there are a lot of investments being given to actually strengthen these ethnic identities to pursue their politics. And I think when we say deep state politics, I think these daily based scholars, they're completely bogged down by these, this failure to understand the deep state politics that is increasingly manifested in the region called India, Myanmar, and Bangladesh borderlands. And we are actually beginning to be a victim. And in this game of geopolitics, there are deep state institutions coming in overt and covert form that actually plays with our multicultural identity. Towards the end of my presentation, I have been of the view that Manipur state is very unique, very distinctive, and it is very, very different from any other state of the country. That has to be repeatedly told in order to protect our multicultural identity. And I have reasons to argue, and I'm sure daily-based scholars and the advocates will listen to our views and have a rethink that Manipur, of course, is a different state. Sixth schedule, for instance, was not meant for Manipur state. Even if you desire, there is a history to that. This state was not to be included within the parameters of sixth schedule. Coming back to the Article 3, which I have been arguing recently, I'm of the view, if you read Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, it says India, that is Bharat, is a union of states, which means India is not a federating state, which means the units will not have any right to secede or to get freedom, because all the units of the Indian Union were becoming part of India through the process of what you had in the Constituent Assembly. And there was no agreement, there was no covenant, there was no treaty signed between the Indian states and the Union of India. Thereby, the Article 3 of the Indian Constitution provides with the provision that the Union government, the Union Parliament, with an ordinary legislation can alter, change, or rename the boundaries of existing states. Now my point is, Manipur state is different. Manipur state, at several stages of its existence in the history, had signed treaty relations, had signed treaty agreements with the Indian Union. First. Second, Manipur state was not fully represented in the Constituent Assembly, through which the present constitution was written. Number two. Number three, even after the independence of India, even after the independence of Manipur in August 1947, Manipur state was met to sign, I repeat, met to sign the merger agreement in 1949. Given these backgrounds, we are a very, very different state, and it continues to be an entity. This entity has a different history, different trajectory. It has a different constitutional background. Therefore, Article 3, which provides the Union Parliament to alter or change name boundaries of a state, should not be applicable to the Manipur state, given the history and the legal and philosophical background of Article 1, because Manipur state had undergone through different treaty, covenant relationship with the Indian state, you like it or not. Now, these are the legal aspects to which we can rely on, and and try to argue that Manipur, of course, is to be treated differently. And therefore, the integrity of Manipur is not merely its territory, its culture, its overlapping cultural spaces, and its multicultural population is to be respected. I'm sure the imposition of President's rule, as in the words of Justice Midul, would bring peace and stability in the state of Manipur. But mind you, Manipur state is also the only state in India which has seen maximum number of President's rule. Now, what has happened to the state of Manipur even after having witnessed 11 President's rule? We continue to be unstable. We continue to be in turmoils. We are increasingly trapped in ethnic conflicts. Now, this is the time for us to question that the small states in India are increasingly facing instability because the bigger parties, the nationalist parties, are actually not working in sync with the interests of the small states. And therefore, small states continue to raise this question, particularly in the border states like Manipur, where your integrity, your historicity is being questioned over and over again. Therefore, in my conclusion, I want to say that this politics of generic identity must be debunked. The overlapping cultural spaces of Manipur state be protected. The unfair binaries which is being projected as absolute must be rejected. And we have enough historical, cultural, and legal parameters through which we can preserve our multicultural state called Manipur. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Noni. Now we'll hear from Dr. Malik.